The following episode may contain spoilers for the game Frosthaven.
Welcome to our board game podcast, A Master's Degree in Rolling Terribly, where you amDirt, I amDirt, everybody amDirt. I'm your host, Detty, and joining me is my co-host, the man who racks up some fat damage numbers on his Geminate, but struggles to kill a creature on 1 HP. Gaz! Say hi, Gaz.
Hi, Gaz.
So, we had a very eventful Monday. But before we go there, can you give us a informative and detailed recap from episode 2?
Yeah, definitely. I can give it a crack. So in episode 2, we talked all about our experience with our first scenario in Frosthaven. And out of that, what we learned was Detty's Drifter, which he says is a jack of all trades, really means that he can't do one thing very well. Arrows hurt when they're aimed at the face. And it's really, really important to double check how impassable a log actually is.
Thank you.
Probably the key takeouts.
Yeah, well, some of those have changed.
Mm-hmm.
So we did manage to do our very first outpost phase after coming back from scenario 1. And that whole process was relatively interesting. It's like a 5 checkpoint kind of system where we had to go through and check for the buildings that we actually had, I think we did a outpost event, which this particular one had bird hunting for a wedding where I think a bunch of people were getting married and some guy wanted to paint a bunch of imps.
Not just some guy, this was our close and trusted friend, according to the game.
that we had never met before.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
he had some harebrained scheme on how he was going to release a bunch of doves into the air, and basically we had a decision to make. Those familiar with Gloomhaven would understand that decision. Do you want to do X or do you want to do Y? Both of them tend to seem completely opposite and sometimes ridiculous, where you go, oh, that seems like a good idea, knowing that probably one of them was going to land us in jail and the other one probably, will shower in riches. So, it was a good way to kick off.
Yeah, and we decided to do the good one. Now, what's interesting about this is that a lot of the characters have little tags, like what they're good at, their skill set almost, and we were sort of going around the table and working at what everyone had and then sort of piecing together which one may work towards the answer we were looking for. So we decided we weren't going to paint the imps that our dear good friend that we've known for a really long time wanted us to do, and we were going to go out and get a whole bunch of new birds. So we figured we would go out and do that. And Gaz looked at his sheet and he saw something about, I don't know, bird hunting or something, and I had resourceful.
Nimble.
You had what, sorry? Nimble, that's right. So we went for that particular option, and it came up with, if you have resourceful, which was the jack of all trades, the Drifter, we would be successful, and we would gain some positive thing, which I've already forgotten about, which was really good.
Yeah, and that did, I guess, did prove that I was wrong, and I will admit when I'm wrong that there is one thing you are good at, and that's catching birds. Now, hopefully this comes up heaps, right? I hope that catching birds is a core mechanic of the game, because then I feel like you're really going to have a chance to shine.
Yeah, end game, it's going to be a room full of birds, and I'm going to have my time to shine after 54 scenarios or something along those lines.
Something actually, just on that, and it kind of relates back to Gloomhaven, because I'm still playing through a digital Gloomhaven campaign. So it's kind of it was interesting the other day. I was playing and we had an event, a city event, and one of the things I was discussing with my mate at the time was that in Gloomhaven, a lot of the events, whether they be road events or city events, there doesn't seem to be a lot of guidance as to how you should make your decision. And so you tend to you look at the two options and you're like, oh, well, this one makes sense. I think this is the good thing. Let's do it. But then sometimes the game will just punish you for it. It's like, oh, haha, you waste your time, lose X money, or do Y thing, right? Like you think, oh, that was the good thing and we got a bad thing out of it. So in Gloomhaven, it can seem a little bit random. But and what that does is I feel is it means that you're just kind of picking which one you think might be best, but you don't really know. What I really liked about how we made the decision in Frosthaven, and we'll bring it back to Frosthaven, is that we looked through those tags, and I actually quite like that. Being able to do that, like we can sit around and look at a problem and go, oh, we didn't know none of them was bird catching, right? But you did say, oh, resourceful could be something like this, and I looked at it and said, I'm nimble. Maybe if we're going to catch things, so I think that's really cool if we're going to keep having that opportunity to do it. Because it allows you to not just here's a random event and it's basically a gotcha event, right? Like a quick time, press X not to die. It's more of a, well, what characters have you got? And do you think maybe you can think your way through this rather than just picking the one that sounds like it's going to be good? So I mean, we're only one event in, so I don't want to sing its praises too much, but that was definitely a good experience.
Yeah, well, do you remember in Gloomhaven on the actual campaign sheet, there was that sort of bar that went up and down based on good decisions, good prosperity, good things, etc., that went up, and if you did bad ones, they went down. And that played a lot into the decisions that you were making during a lot of those road and city events, right? You wanted, if you were on a trajectory to go up, knowing that that was going to unlock more content in the game and potentially not like another class or something like that, you wanted to keep pushing that one up by constantly doing the right or the good thing. And that was something that I think skewed the decisions we were trying to make, which kind of backfired a little bit. I saw what they were trying to do, but this one here, we don't have any of that to really worry about, right? So we can base it a bit more on what we feel.
Yeah, I suppose, that's the reputation, which I think we only have prosperity now, which is, I guess, how well the town's doing. So that's a different thing. It's like you can see which ones are going to help the town, but it's not about picking good or evil, which, was, you'd almost have to pick the same track because I think there was unlocks and stuff behind it. But anyway, it was just really interesting. And I just know because we've had a constant events in Gloomhaven where you'll run into an old character and it's just like, oh, do you want to just ignore them or do you want to go have a drink with them and catch up on old times? And you do that and it's bad. It goes, oh, you waste all your money and you go, hang on, surely that's not the bad response out of this kind of whole storytelling business. So I'm just hoping that we do have a bit more clarity when we go into these, not to what the outcome will be, but at least like, oh yeah, that makes sense, we did pick that, or like, no, we didn't really have that ability. So
So we also learned a little bit about brewing potions. So this is a new feature in Frosthaven where they actually have one of those. They're very big on the advent calendar style pop out thing, which they've done with the scenario flowchart, and they've done with the actual alchemy. I forgot what it's called. It's a alchemy lab or whatever it is, one of the buildings. But you can actually visit it during the downtime and actually craft potions or brew potions. And it uses some of the leafy, flowery resources in the game. So as part of the loot deck, you've got things like metal and lumber and hide, exactly. And then you've got 6 different plants. So you can actually take to the alchemy lab 2 of these plants in combination. And later levels of the alchemy lab, you can actually create 3 leaf potions and even stronger ones later. But at the moment, we only had access to the basic 2. So what's really cool about this is we didn't actually know what we were making or what we were doing. It was just I happened to have 2 different thistle, earthroot kind of things. I honestly can't remember what they were, and I submitted them, and we got to pop open one of those windows, and I got a potion that actually turned out to be really, really useful and something that my character can actually hang on to for a while. And what's cool about this is now we've discovered that exact recipe, we can actually go out and make another one, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and that's it. Other than the coolness factor of going, I feel like we're, as a group, discovering these recipes and unlocking them, rather than you've reached a certain reputation or a certain prosperity, and now the merchant just has more stuff, right? So hey, you buy things. You actually feel like, oh well, because we did a thing, we chose this, we've now unlocked it. It also gates behind the potions behind an actual gathering mechanic, which again, we'll wait to see if this is good or not, because there could be some really important potions we need to get, which we just can't find the mats for. But if it doesn't, if it all kind of is balanced in a sense, it's going to be great, because it's not just, oh, I've got 20 gold, I'm going to go buy a stam potion, right? It's actually going to require some element of like, oh, I'm hunting this one material so I can get this item. And I mean, we see that in the crafting, but you can see all the recipes. It's going to be really cool as we move forward to go, oh, I really need that potion. Like that's going to be really kind of key to help kind of one of my combos or some synergy. So I'm hunting for this one particular mat. And I think that's going to be an extra kind of level of, hopefully it's not frustration because if you don't find it. But yeah, hopefully it does add a bit more kind of flavor to that looting component of the game.
Well, definitely. When you have like the craftsman or any of those sort of ones where you actually have the recipes, we know what we can make based on the available ones. We don't know what's not available. But it's so much more visual when you can actually see this brewing list of potions that we have yet to discover. They're literally hidden behind these little pocket windows. And that's motivating enough to go, well, we want to see what they all do. Like, I have no idea how many craftable weapons and items and all that kind of stuff there is. I know there's a fat deck of them, but I'm more excited to see kind of what's behind door number 3, in a way.
Yeah, that's 100% right. Because, if you had all the potions listed, most of you wouldn't craft. Like I can look into the items that we've got. I just know there's some that we're not going to craft, right? Because A, we've either unlocked better versions of already, or B, they're just for our current makeup. We don't need it. Now that might change when you bring new characters in. I don't know how they start. I'm sure there's rules around catching them up and stuff like that. So that could change. But now, as soon as you have the 2 or 3 herbs required to craft a potion, you're going to do it because it's this cool, like, oh, I wonder what's behind it, right? Like, there's no reason not to. And that's such a cool way of encouraging people to go down that path. Like, it's such a cool experience.
Oh, definitely. We had the decision to, once we completed the rest of the outpost phase also consists of leveling up your characters, which, it gives you new cards and modifying your deck and using your perks and all that kind of stuff, as well as doing daytime activities. Like visiting some of the various locations and like what we did with the brewing and all of that. After we kind of settled on that.
Just to jump in there a second, the thing that I thought it was interesting, and I think we'll talk about this maybe a bit more later, but about that is that it ticks off a day. Like it's got the timer.
Yeah.
Which, is had in Gloomhaven, you can only level up or do all these things when you return to Gloomhaven. Now you can only do those things when you return to Frosthaven, which is the outpost phase. But now there's actually a consequence for doing that, rather than just like, oh, you have to do another one. But yeah, it's that's just something that jumped out at me at that part. That was
time's constantly moving.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like every single time just go back to Gloomhaven Frosthaven, because the worst thing that can happen is you get another travel event or road event, which really aren't that bad.
Well, that's all it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. There was
now you got so much more to consider.
Yeah, well, that's it. Because if we don't know the consequences of the time thing, other than on the little track, I think it goes from summer to winter. And if Game of Thrones has taught us anything, winter's bad. So, like, we probably don't want that to happen. And I think we'll talk about this later with our outcome of our second scenario we did. But we actually made the decision not to go back. And that's cool. We've actually made the decision to not just do that. So
At the end of scenario 1, we discovered that was the attack on Frosthaven and was made by the Algox. And they've been basically tracked back by multiple NPCs who suddenly have a lot of trust in us to 2 separate locations where they've almost got like a stronghold up near, I believe, the Copperneck Mountains, and then a smaller band of the Algox members actually sort of split off and went around the back, right? Indicating that there was more like a back entrance. So we had to make a decision as to which way we wanted to follow, and if we wanted to go in the main way, which would have been scenario 3, or through the sneaky beaky way, which was scenario 2. And we kind of discussed it, and it became a little bit more of a, well, I think it might have even been you that was like, oh, let's go the sneaky way. And I was kind of like, yep, cool, there's the decision, let's go. Right? So we immediately made our way towards scenario 2. Now, on the way, we did pull up a road event, and it was the Strange Savas, which is one of the factions, one of the races, who were having a tea party. And all of a sudden, they were yelling at us and ordering us to serve them rocks like we were their waiters that just randomly came out of nowhere. And yes, we knew exactly who they were and why weren't we working. So we had to, it was a very fancy tea party, kind of like the Mad Hatter one. It was apparently really well done. So it was very confusing and very out of nowhere, which I don't know how I feel about that particular one. At least it wasn't scary and it didn't involve you start the scenario with less cards or everyone gets 3 curses in their deck or anything like that. It was fairly standard. I don't even remember what we got out of it.
Yeah. I think it was just a little reward for the decision we made. But look, I guess it's a bit more flavorful than you're walking along the road and you find some berries, or you're walking along and you see a bear, or you're walking on the road and you see a merchant. Like, it's trying to
Definitely.
I guess they could have just copy pasted all the road events from Gloomhaven, but clearly they haven't, which is a positive sign so far.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we ended up in scenario 2 in the sneaky beaky way. And because it was sneaky beaky, right, that we would expect to see maybe 2 guards and that was it. We're in, right? I began to set up the actual scenario. We did our battle goals and handed all those out at the start this time. And used the Frosthaven scenario viewer to set up the map as per normal. And then, we were on our way. The very first room, we had a bunch of, guards and all that kind of stuff, and a bunch of archers in the very back. Do you want to tell everyone what happened in that first room?
Yeah, well, look, it didn't go to plan. I think there was a bit of toing and froing as to what we were going to do. And I think we spoke about this last week in, playing one scenario, you get a better idea about your character. And some of the characters have little setups. Like, I know that you had a couple of cards knowing a bit more about how your kind of buff cards work. I knew about mine a little bit more. I looked and went like, oh, okay, I can kind of see how I can, eke a bit more damage out of this or make some of the cards work together. So I think maybe too many of us went into we're just going to chill and wait and set up. And what proceeded to happen was the 3 guards that were in front of us moved straight up and basically locked us into the starting area, while the archers then, I think, proceeded to walk up and start shooting us. And it's probably an understatement to say that we were getting fairly well trashed by turn 2. And I know particularly from my end, because my character works in a sense that you're in one form or another, so the range form or the melee form. The trick with the range form is that most of the range cards have to be at ranges 3 or 4 or 4 or 5, so you can't just shoot something next to you and take disadvantage. You have to be within those ranges. So I know there was a turn where I was like, I actually can't do anything. Like, if I don't go super late and people move out of the way or we kill something. So it all ended up being a little bit of a cluster, like a smushed up cluster, and that made it very tricky to navigate and move around, and it definitely felt messy. 100% our fault, because I think we faffed around for a while, which we did a little bit later again, and we also saw the consequences of that, which we'll talk about. But I think, we might have worked out that we need to a bit better balance between preparation and action.
Yeah, so I learned in the downtime between scenarios, I learned that I should play a little bit more with some of these persistent abilities, and one of them is like a tanking one. They're like, every time you take a damage, you can reduce it by 1. It's 1 shield, and I had another one that was a retaliation 2 with a range 2, and I was like, hey, if I combine those together, I can show Gaz that I can do the tanking thing. What they're not good at is against ranged. And I learned that I don't want to say the hard way, because I actually found it really easy. Turn 1, I prepared 2 different things and just stood there. And I did not take all the arrows to the face. No, that was Gaz and Phil who took all the arrows. And I got to stand there and not really get hit. And it was really, really nice and refreshing, because these 2 were like needing a tank, right? Because I can't tank, right? So I got to actually go ahead and do it my way, which made me feel really, really good, but it just meant that I was lacking a little bit of offense and definitely lacking a little bit of movement. So, look, ultimately we did clear the room. Okay, we did manage to move out. We managed to clear the room. Phil did puddle stuff. We've dubbed the Death Walker the Shadow Pooper, because all we see it do is just put shadow puddles on the floor. Now, there is a point where he will blow up all the poop shadows and a guy gets poop all over his face, and it does a lot of damage. But in the meantime, it seems to be a lot of setup.
Yeah, there's definitely mostly ramping and him telling us that he can't do something specific because there's not enough shadows. Or are you going to move so that I can get to my shadow? Or are you going to kill that guy so I can have a shadow? I feel like there's a lot of onus on us to do a lot of things to get his ramp going. Now, again, we'll talk about this later on the episode. It definitely did pay off again, like it did in the first episode.
Mm.
But noticing a trend. So we're definitely, I think we're going to have to carry the first half of each scenario, until Phil gets all of his shadow poop everywhere.
Mm. Yeah. So we kind of clear the first room, and this is the designated break time where everyone starts going, I'm taking a long break. I'm taking a long break. Now, some of us managed our cards really, really well, mostly me. So, and I believe Phil might have as well. But the other two, Mr. Bone Shaper and Mr. Geminate, or Gazanate, or whatever we want to call it, didn't. And they needed to announce long resting. So Phil and I looked at each other and was like, well, should we open this room or not? So we decided to open the door. And we were greeted with a scout, which was a new enemy we hadn't seen yet. We had no idea what it was going to do. We were also greeted with an event because the foreteller thing, basically when this door's open, we listened to the next part. And there was an Algox priest in there who was actually on our side. It was actually an ally. It was actually fighting against all the other ones that were in there. And that was a bit of a surprise. We didn't expect that. Accompanied with that was another 3 bloody archers down the very end of the room. So this was a very range-heavy, so far, dungeon that we were doing. And because the card that came up for the rangers was some ridiculous range, and it was sniper mode, essentially. They weren't moving, they were just pot-shotting. I didn't want to go into the room. And Phil also didn't want to go into the room. We were hoping to lead them out. Now, the problem with this was the ally, it turns out it was a new win condition, in that we needed to keep this priest ally alive. And if there's no target for her to shoot, she will continue walking to the other side of the hallway to a door and basically try to end the scenario on her own. So it became an escort quest, essentially. And due to our slow movement and not going in there, something amazing happened.
Yeah, so I think leading
And you called it.
Yeah, that's unfortunately, I think it was the second turn of us not really going in there because I think we had another round of the archers.
Yeah.
Either just slightly moving or not moving and going like, oh, we can kill this scout that's just up here. We don't really need to move. Little clarification, I wasn't long resting, but I had drawn a battle goal that said don't ever move any more than 2 squares. And it was 2 ticks. So I was like, I'm not going to throw that away. You guys will be fine. I'll just slowly walk my way across there. So I was a bit behind, and that's why I couldn't really impact it. But I mean, I could have jumped in there later on, but I still wanted my battle goal. But yeah, the I think it was after the second turn of us not going in, we killed the scout, and we looked at it, and I was like, oh, as long as she, being the priest ally, doesn't go really early and then the archers go really early but straight after, we'll be fine because we're all going to have our turns and move in. We'll get in between the priest and the archers. Then we flipped over the monster deck and she was going at like a 9, right? Which is faster than any of us can go. And the archers were at like a 13 or a 14 or something like that. So again, something ridiculously quick. Now, this is also considering Phil has the initiative boot, so he can drop his initiative by 10. So that meant that, yeah, even with that, he still couldn't go in between those. And then she moved forward 3 squares right in the space so the archers could just literally just, like, mow her down.
Yeah.
And I was looking like, oh, look, I guess if they draw lots of misses and -2s, then I'm pretty sure we still lose, but sure, let's go.
And the stars aligned.
Yeah, so it was one of those, yeah, look, if this happens, then it's bad. And as soon as it flipped over, I was like, yeah, she's on 4 life. This is... so, yeah.
It was definitely a combination of stuff. Like, I was hesitant to go in because I was trying to work my initiative around the archers. I needed them to go before me so that I could run out, but every time I went before them, I was too afraid to go out because then I was going to cop a bunch of unnecessary damage. She wasn't really moving. I wasn't too worried about that, but there was so much stalling. We just weren't eager to get into that room. And it was a really unusual situation to be in.
Yeah, and I think I touched on this in episode 1 where I was talking about what I love about the decision kind of making process or the decisions you are given when it is your turn and through the scenario, in that you have so many of them that you can't just look at one turn and go, oh, well, these two monsters went in this order, so therefore we're screwed. I look at that situation and we had so many opportunities to make so many better decisions. Now, obviously, we didn't know that was going to happen. But yeah, totally could have changed that. So it's an unfortunate series of events, but that's what can happen in this game. And I think one of the things we did poorly, and we definitely did it better the next time, was identify how we could lose, right? And the priest that has 6 life and is 8 squares away from archers, 3 archers that can do a lot of damage, is our lose condition at that point. Yeah. So we 100% needed to look at that. And as you said, there was a couple of turns where you're like, oh, I don't really want to jump in because I'll get shot a couple of times. I feel like we needed to evaluate that and go, well, once you're there, that means she can't get shot, which means we can't lose.
Yeah.
You might need to burn a card because you get hit real hard, but the alternative is we lose.
Yeah, that's so true. Like we definitely worked that out. So we made the decision to run it back. Essentially, we talked at the table, and it was like 9 o'clock at this stage, and we're like, "Do we do this again?" It's quite easy to reset it up. We know exactly what's going on. Do we go again? And we all looked to Calvin because he's the one that wakes up the earliest in the morning, and he was like, "Yeah, let's go." So I could see there was a bit of redemption that everyone was looking to get on this particular scenario. So we quickly reset everything back up, gave everyone battle goals again, and then we just did turn 1 all over again.
And that's where, just to talk quickly about what happens when you lose the scenario. So I'm really glad for all the people listening to our podcast who want to understand this or maybe didn't get to experience losing a scenario. We got to do that really early. Hopefully we don't have to do it again for a while. But when you lose, you basically have the chance you keep all your gold and all your like different things you've looted, like the items, I'm pretty sure, but you lose any of your... No, you keep the treasure. That's right.
Yeah, we got the treasure. Calvin got it.
Calvin got it. And you get to keep your XP. So I think you just lose the looted stuff, which is the materials. That's what you lose when you restart. But you just go straight back. Or alternatively, you can keep everything, but go back to Frosthaven. And this is that decision point, which I think is, again, really clever in that we don't know what's going to happen if we tick too many of those time boxes. Every time we go back and do an outpost phase, we've got to cross off another box. But we all were like, oh, we don't really need to go back to Frosthaven, and we definitely don't want to tick the time across more. Let's just stay, right? So I can see this, and hopefully, our next one as well is a continuation. We can't go back to Frosthaven here, but hopefully we're going to have these cool decision points where we're like, oh, we really want to go back to town, but we don't want to drive that other part forward. Like, let's go a bit hard. Like, let's go one more mission, right? And I'm really looking forward to that being actually a decision.
Yeah, I was reading a thread on Reddit, on the board game subreddit, and someone literally wrote down, how does everyone move on, essentially? How does everyone handle losing a scenario in a campaign-driven game? And it got a host of replies, and I was one of the people that responded to it and said, this literally just happened to us last night, and our philosophies behind it. And I was reading some of the responses to it, and some people are like, it's part of the game, lower the difficulty if you need to, whatever, just, 2 cents. And someone made the comment that it depends on the loss. So if it was a really long scenario, and they weren't specifically talking about Gloomhaven or Frosthaven or anything, it was just a general kind of conversation, but they were saying if it was just a general scenario and you get all the way to the end and it was just the roll of a die, right? It was an amDirt. It was just a full terrible roll that caused the loss of the scenario, they would count that as a win. But if it was something that they just played terribly all the way through and they were doing just all the wrong decisions and all that, kind of like what happened with our first run of this one, and they can address where they actually lost that scenario, they would 100% play it again. And it was interesting reading the different comments. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm I have to say 100% true to everything that's going on. Otherwise, I feel like I'm cheating. I don't know. There's one thing that stuck with me from when I was a kid in primary school, and the teacher said, if you cheat, you're only cheating yourself. For some reason that's become my philosophy in life, so I can't ever fudge anything. And so I feel like if you have to play it out, like if you lose it, you lose it. It doesn't matter about the consequences. And I think actually I've played through with some friends Pandemic Legacy Season 1 and Season 2, and that has interesting consequences if you lose. You get to basically play each mission twice, but if you fail at the second time, you just move forward. And there are just consequences because time moves forward. So we luckily we got to a couple of points where it was pretty hairy, but we never really lost two in a row. I know we got to the end of the final mission, one of them on our second go, and almost lost. And that was a big one. But yeah, I feel like, I don't know, for me, you just kind of, oh, we lost it. We either deal with the consequences, or if there's the option, we go again.
I 100% agree with you. And I think it's just something that we can both agree on. And this is how we play, which is kind of how we do play Gloomhaven and now Frosthaven, in that we need to earn it in a way, and we need to do it legit. If we mess something up like an RNG, it doesn't feel right. If we have to put the odds back in our favor, or just say we won it when we failed something at the very last room, just say, oh, look, we were 99.9% through the bar, right? I see why some people, it could be a time thing, right? It could be not having motivation to put everyone back, in that spot and go through that whole ordeal again. But there's something, when we failed that, and to be able to go in there knowing just a little bit more information about where where the creatures are and their locations, because now we know that, it changed my thought process and strategies, and I wanted to try different things, and I was looking forward to it. You and I come from a background of games like World of Warcraft and raiding and dungeons and all that kind of stuff. You'd never want to tap out towards the end of a dungeon, or any of those kind of situations, or a raid. You keep going and going, getting better and better and better until you complete it. And that's kind of how I feel about this. Now, if we had failed that 5 times, come back to me, because I'm not 100% sure where I'd stand on it by then.
I feel like there are mechanisms in the game to, like, you can drop the difficulty down lower,
Yes.
can't you? Yeah.
Yes, you can.
So I feel like that's it. And, I still fall back on however your group is going to get the most fun and enjoyment and the best experience out of playing the game, do that.
Yeah.
Right. Like, if you literally just want to play each scenario once, and you just want the story and you just want the experience of going through it, and win or loss, it doesn't matter. You just move forward. Amazing,
100%.
right? Like, you get to the end of it and say, we had an amazing time, then you played it right. So, I mean, for us, I know we're kind of where we stand, and we're all come from a similar space, and definitely we'll play it out, and hopefully we never get in a situation where we fail the same thing 5 times. So maybe we'll revisit this episode and you can ask me then. But yeah, I feel like for us, that's it. But yeah, I guess people just need to do whatever they find fun.
Yeah, do it for the group. So we had our second run in it, and things felt a lot more coordinated. Things felt a lot more, we felt more attuned with everything we were dealing with. I changed the cards that I was going to use. I had a much better idea of what I was going to do based on the structure of this particular scenario, and having the ranged units always at the end of these corridors. I changed out the persistent cards for the ones that were going to give me movement, and the ones that were going to allow me to close the distance on them. And I knew right from the very beginning, I'm going straight for the archers. And it became a me and Phil's shadow things on the floor job. And then we had Calvin on his Bone Shaper and Gaz on the front lines dealing with the guards. And it made such a difference, especially in that first room. We kind of blew up that room incredibly quickly and jumped straight back into the room of failure.
Yeah, it definitely. And I think I also learn a little bit more about my class or character, which again I will continue to do every time we play, in that I need to be a little less conservative and a bit more reckless. The only way I get XP is from lost cards, and I have more cards than most classes do. So I think I kind of looked at it and went, all right, I need to go a bit harder. And actually, just coincidentally, the battle goal I drew was burn 2 cards before you first rest. So um,
Mm.
I think my first turn was jump in and no, it was shoot all 3 of them with a burn card, do a bunch of damage, and
And they
then
were in a
jump in.
triangle, weren't they? The
Yeah,
three dudes.
yep, the perfect triangle. And then the next turn after I jumped in, I went at like a really early. I think I've got a very, very low initiative card, and I put a wound on all of them and Phil, because he moved too close. So
Oh,
this,
that wound on Phil. That
yeah,
lasted so long.
yeah. So with the Geminate, we're talking about this last week with the class. There's a lot of ability to target allies as well, which it's more collateral damage than targeted. So this one particularly was do this really big burst that wounds everything, including allies. And Bill just happened to be the one that crept forward and got that. And then, yeah, there was a bit of a joke for the next 6 turns while he kept bleeding and no one healed him.
No one healed him.
I was going to, but it turns out that I actually discarded my heal card as part of that big turn, and I was waiting for it to come back, and it just didn't come back. So I think it was actually Calvin later down the line that did a really big
Oh,
heal.
way down the line, he healed
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
And then I
So,
think he finished the whole thing on full health. Phil, I did notice, was having an even, like, if it was even possible. Now, Phil is our Deathwalker, the pooper, the Shadow Pooper. He was having an even slower game this time, where he literally was really not doing nothing. We joke about him not doing anything. He literally really wasn't doing all that much from this. And this actually, strangely, when we get to the topic of battle goals, it's actually a fun discussion as to how they kind of shape the game. But it was something that I definitely noticed. I was definitely making some strange decisions where I would kind of unload and then I'd kind of stand there and immediately heal someone and demand someone come up to me so I could heal them and get within range. Phil was never in range for it. So it was really unfortunate because I could have healed him, but I kept throwing it at Calvin or one of his minions or Gaz instead of doing an attack or anything else. So we cleared the second room quite convincingly with a very similar strat to what we used in the first room. I went straight to the end and then everyone else joined me and we blew up the archers all the way to the point where we managed to get to the door of the second room while the priest was still walking down the corridor to the point where she was going to get there last, which was a good position to be in. Then we got our first look into the third room. And the third room had a objective. It was a sheet of glass that looked like it was almost like a hatch, like a secret hatch on the ground. It was a sheet of glass that needed to be broken. And the room was also filled with more scouts. We had an Algox guard, and I think that might have been it. Yeah, I think it was that was it. And it was a smaller-ish room, and also a chest, actually. We had our first scenario loot chest, which was exciting to get to. And we were sort of looking around at each other and just working out how many kind of cards we had left. And despite playing it fairly flawlessly, I was still nervous at that stage that we had reached the third room, that we had enough cards to remove everything, because our objective was to kill everything in this scenario, but also break this sheet of glass in the ground that had 12 health. And did we have enough to do it?
Yeah, and you could feel the tension, especially considering it was about 11 o'clock. We had already restarted once. We 100% knew we weren't going to restart again tonight or that night. So that door opened and everything started appearing. And I'm pretty sure that the opening of the door was Phil moving into the door, and then the next initiative was all of the scouts just laying into him. Now, from memory, I believe he only got hit once because I think one missed. One drew a -2. Like, he took no damage.
And Calvin had cursed them as well, like in the earlier rooms. So there was curses already loaded in the deck.
Yeah, that's right. So that ended up not being that bad. But I feel like everyone, every turn was like, I'm about to die. I've got no cards left. But we made it all the way through with cards left, right? Like, so I think this is one of those things we need to, I think we all went into preservation mode, which is something you can do in Gloomhaven, right? You know, you've got 6 cards left in your hand. That's actually quite a few turns, because you can have 3 turns and you can long rest. Now that's 4 turns, and then you can have another couple of turns after discarding one. Then you can do another long rest. So realistically, you got 6 cards. You're like, oh, I'm almost out of cards. Well, as long as you don't have to burn any, you still got 5, 6, 7 turns left.
Yeah.
You know, and when we look at the room going like, oh no, there's 5 monsters in here, plus this sheet of ice or glass or whatever it was that we need to do 12. How are we going to do this? And I think Phil had a couple of big turns as well, which helped. But yeah, definitely it was a good look at what we can do if we play really conservatively.
Yeah. Like I as the drifter, I finally slapped on the shield's persistent ability and the retaliate one, and we were even talking about it, and I just said, I'm going it here, and I pointed exactly where I was planning on going. I went straight in there to try and just tank as many as I could while everyone else got to set up and come into the room. And it had a real epic feel to it. It was very make or break, and then everyone came in that shared that targeting load. All the summons came in. I think Phil had a summon. Calvin was rocking 3. And then, of course, we had the priest who couldn't even get into the room because of all the summons. It was a bit of a bottleneck thing that was happening. But there was a really, really nice even spread of focus where one thing was focusing on me, another thing was hitting Gaz. I think 3 things were hitting Phil. Phil kept tying with someone else. It might have been Calvin. Kept tying with someone else in initiative and kept going before. Like the person, like just before. So he kept getting targeted by a lot of the abilities and it became rather amusing. But yeah, it was really, really cool. We ended up taking everything down and had enough card action to get to the chests, which we got, which ended up being 3 cards from the loot deck, which was great because I didn't actually loot a single thing leading up to that. So that was something that I got and I was very happy with that. And then we managed to throw whatever we had left into that ice sheet and
Yeah, I think on the loot, I'm starting to see not frustration, but definitely some of the RNG that applies because you're drawing from this loot deck. I looted lots of things and got all coins. Now, I don't know what you do with coins. Hopefully, it's something really cool. I think you can buy soldiers is in the outpost phase, which doesn't really appeal to me because it doesn't directly impact me. I wanted flowers and
do it for the team, buddy.
Herbs and all that stuff.
You're our soldier boy.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's so. I mean, that's been comical so far. Hopefully, there is a way of turning money into power.
Yes. So we definitely ended up finishing that scenario, which was really, really good. Now, what we did learn from that, well, story-wise, do you want to let us know kind of what happened as soon as we had finished that?
Yeah, so while we thought we were going in the kind of sneaky backdoor way to try and get a jump on these baddies, what turns out we've done is accidentally allied with one of the factions of these baddies. So the priest belongs to, I'm going to stuff all this up.
But speaker or something, right?
Yeah, like basically there's 2 factions of Algox. And one of them worship the mountain in the air, and one of them worship the mountain in the ice, and they kind of do it differently. They all think this place is really important to them spiritually, but they look at it a different way, and so they're always fighting over it. While the Algox were attacking Frosthaven, this faction that this priest belongs to, they took it upon themselves to kind of try to sneak in. I'm not sure what she was going to do if we didn't rock up, because there was absolutely no way she was taking out all the rest of these guys. So I'm not sure.
She got booked with us there.
My 2 archers. So I'm not sure she was going to take out that next room, but let's not go into that. But we now have the opportunity, and I think in the story, of basically saying, all right, do we want to continue along the path and ally with essentially the faction of the priest, Algox, and her faction, or do we want to switch it up and go the other way? I believe we have the opportunity of doing. Not to go back to the other scenario we missed, but I think we can just take a different route to ally with a different faction, depending on how we want to behave. And honestly, I think that is amazing. Like, I'm so excited by the fact we have to make such a pivotal decision so early on, and there doesn't seem to be a clear path. Like, it's not, do you want to help the evil wizard, or did you want to kill the evil wizard, right? Like, that kind of, yeah, both of them sound cool and you can justify both ways, but probably a good version. This just seems like we have no idea who these factions are. We only have the word of this priest who was just hanging out in the middle of the sneaky area. So, like, what do we do? And it's going to be really cool because I assume it's going to have flow-on effects in the short term, but I imagine the way that this is designed, it's probably going to have flow-on effects for the long term as well.
Yeah, most probably. I wasn't as blown away with it because I struggle to stay in touch with story anyway, and I sometimes struggle to care. But I like hearing what you had to say about that actually made me look at it in a slightly different way, which is really kind of cool. We are locked into the next scenario as well, so they branch around where if you pick scenario 2, you're going to have to go to scenario 4, and vice versa. If you pick scenario 3, it locks out number 2, and you still end up at scenario 4. And you're right, this could lead to a very interesting decision where it could be like, part of the scenario will be, well, depending on which scenario you came from, this is going to be a different rule or a different story thing, or read this particular area here, and it could be very interesting about the touch on and effect of that decision we made.
Yeah. That's how I'm hoping, right? Like let's throw it all out there in predictions. I hope that the next scenario is a choice, right? And not just like, do you want to go this way or do you want to go that way? But it's actually in the scenario, the objectives are slightly different depending on what you want to do. Do you want to kill this faction or do you want to fight this faction and go that way? So, it will be very interesting to see, and I'm looking forward to us diving further down that space.
So, battle goal breakdown. You already mentioned the battle goal that you actually had, which was add 2 cards to your loss pile before your first rest, which was actually worth 2 ticks.
Yeah, it's my favorite battle goal now because I did it in the first 2 turns, and then I didn't have to worry about my battle goal for the rest of the game. It didn't change my playstyle, and by the first rest seems really easy. I'm playing a class that has lots of cards, right? Like I think there's an element of throwing a few cards out anyway. So it wasn't that hard for me, and it's 2 ticks, which I think is a big piece. Comparatively to the one I had on our first attempt, which was a don't move more than 2 spaces, I constantly found almost every single turn that was restricting what I can do, which is great. Like, that's what they're supposed to do in a way. But I definitely would never be picking that one again.
Yeah, well, that's really, really fair enough. I mean, the fact that those 3 starting mobs were in a triangle within range, and you blew those cards, it wasn't like sometimes you want to guess other people's battle goals, and you kind of go, oh, why did they make that decision? Why are they not doing this, or why are they not doing that? It didn't even cross my mind that would even be a thing of yours. It was just that was such a good lineup. Why wouldn't you use an ability like that, even if it was lost, because the DPS from that would be worth it? And also, I know you get XP from losing cards, so how else are you going to get your XP, right?
That's it. So now if I just blow cards every turn and you go, oh, this is going real hard really early, it'd be like, I might just have that battle goal again.
That's true. I had Promoter. So Promoter was, I had to perform an ability targeting an ally before your first rest and in between each of your rests. And can I just say, this was stupid. I hated this. At the very beginning, I was like, oh, okay, it's not too bad. But as your cards dwindle, knowing that you had to do that in between each rest became horrendous, because it got to a stage where I would have 4 cards in my hand or 6 cards in my hand. And here's my move, here's my attack, here's my move, here's my attack, and now here's my move here. Oh, no, I can't. I got to save one of these to heal. And I need to do this on someone in range. And I just need to heal someone. I'm also running around on half health, and I'm never healing myself. So it felt like it really messed up my flow, where I was just having really inefficient turns, because instead of hitting something that was about to die, I had to throw a heal out there. Now, I did complete this, and it got so hard towards the end because I had very little cards left. I had enough to do 3 turns, and each of those turns in between the short rests or long rests that I was doing, I had to actually target an ally to get it off. I will never pick this again if I can help it, just because of how horrible it was to mess up the actual just tempo of playing it. And I don't know how you would have gone with something like that. I suppose.
What's the wording on it again? Like just an ability that affects.
Yeah, perform an ability targeting an ally before your first rest and in between all of your other rests.
Oh, that's fine. I can just muddle everyone.
But is it targeting an ally?
Yeah, I assume so. If they're in the red hex, they get targeted, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's fair.
If I ever pull that one, I might ask some clarification questions.
Okay,
So
that's fair enough. Let's see. We got wasted and conservator. Okay. So this is the one Calvin had. Calvin had his Bone Shaper, and he had lose a card to negate 2 or less damage from an attack, which he didn't complete. I just looking at my sheets. He did. No, where is he? No. I'm looking at the sheets right now because I actually have a stat tracking thing that I pulled up that showed how much damage we all did and healing, etc. Calvin barely took any damage. He was never really targeted. He was never really in a position where he could actually use this.
yeah, and that's always going to be the problem with any of the battle goals that relate around his character doing like interacting with monsters. So I mean, it's fine if he has to kill because he gets credit if his minions kill, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking damage, like he's never in front of his minions because
You
they go.
don't really want to put yourself in a position where you're going to take damage because a lot of times it's not going to just be one person that's targeting you. If you put yourself in a position to get targeted, you're most likely going to got 3 hits.
Yeah, and burning a card to like reduce
To negate 2 or
damage.
less.
Yeah, like it seems it's such a like if you're tanking, then potentially because you might have some shields, you might bring a 3 or a 4 down to 2, and then which case you can be like, well, okay, it's still terrible. But yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't have minded that one. I would have been fine with that. But I can see where, yeah, different cards work, have more use with other players and other characters.
The difference with that one as well, which again I think from what the battle goal I chose, is that once you've done it, you can forget about it. The thing that would cause me stress and anxiety about the one you chose is that I constantly have to remember it, and
that's what caused me so much stress and anxiety.
Yeah. So they're the ones
I couldn't set it and forget it.
From Gloomhaven that's like only do short rests, and I'd always go through the whole thing and then accidentally long rest or the other way around and go, oh, I just forgot about this battle goal because I forgot it was a thing I needed to do constantly or not do constantly. That's the part, like, so.
Well, every time I did my round, sometimes it was the first thing I would do, or it was something I would save in my hand for the last thing I do as a remember. And once I did the rest, I can be like, yes, I don't have to think about it. Like, I don't have to worry about it. But towards the end, I would have a turn and then worry about it, and then have a turn and worry about it because it just came up way too often.
Yeah.
And that was very annoying. Finally, we had Phil. Now, I did say earlier that Phil was doing absolutely nothing. That's because his card was never perform an action with a lost icon. And Phil liked to use a lot of his lost cards to do a lot of his crazy attacks and abilities and all that kind of stuff. So because and I don't really know how he works, I just know he does shadow poops everywhere. Yeah, it wasn't really doing much with it. But just like last time, when he ramped up, he unloaded and he ended up topping our damage charts with, let me look here. He had 3 instances where he hit for an 8.
Yeah, he was like, he crit like 3 times in a row. Like, I think he crit, he bless crit, and then reshuffle next turn and crit again or something like that. Like, it was crazy. And he definitely went from not doing much to doing heaps.
Yeah, right when we needed it.
Yeah, plus his summon actually did a lot of work as well. He had this very, very fragile shadow summon that he popped out just before we jumped into the third room, and that did a lot of work as well. Like, it drew well, but I think it also had a decent attack. So he kind of saved it all up for then, and from a battle goal perspective, I would never choose that one, not with a Geminate anyway, because literally all of my cards need to be lost. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't mind it because of the persistent cards. Just I would have to be on top of not losing them. That's all.
Yeah. It seems like one that would be, yeah, but that's probably from all the ones we chose, the one that's kind of, it changes your play style a little bit, but not completely. I guess depending on the class.
So I had the worst one.
You had the most annoying one, yeah, definitely. So.
I do have just a couple of tidbits from our, damage kind of meters and all of that. It's heavily inspired by World of Warcraft's add-ons, and I'm kind of just manually filling in damage and all that, which I might give to someone else because it's much easier for someone else who's not me to be kind of doing this.
What I thought was funny though is after a little bit into, everyone was very keen on like, oh, did you get my damage? Did you get my damage?
Yeah.
Like, I did here, I did that, and it does become a little bit more of a oh well, hang on, before we move on, and make sure all of my turn was documented by Detty.
That's true. The only thing I didn't know document accurately was actually the loot and the looting. I got lost with that, unfortunately. But everything else I felt pretty good. And then, of course, there was clarifications on, statuses. Because I was tracking positive and negative statuses, if you're blessing a teammate or you're buffing a teammate, it's a positive status effect. And if you're causing muddles and all of that, but then Gaz, of course, can muddle and wound a teammate. And does that count? And no, it doesn't.
100%.
He's the only it's the only character that can get additional statuses illegally.
I feel like
100%.
I feel like there was several times through the recording of these stats that I suggested or asked whether something was tracked, and you said no. And they're all because they're my class features.
That's right.
Yeah.
Should we put one that says how many times you move one of your persistent tokens on one of your cards? Should we track that?
Sure, why not? You can have that one if you want.
No.
Hey, at least you'll be able to do something really well.
Oh, shut up. I did fine. So it turns out that I did the least amount of damage, but not by much, okay? I did 2 damage less than Calvin, who in turn did 1 more than you. Oh, so I came last by 1. All right, I had 34 damage overall. Hang on, 34 overall. You had 35 overall, okay? That's all. You just did 1 more than me. And then Calvin on his Bone Shaper with, mind you, the Bone Shaper combo and Phil's... Oh, there's a pop. And Phil's summoned was really, really cool to have all of these summon units running around, taking hits and dishing out a lot of damage. It was actually really, really useful.
Mm.
Damage taken. I definitely took a lot of damage, but I didn't take as much as you. I don't know what this was. I'm almost certain I just failed to track this properly, and I'll need to do this in the future because it doesn't seem like it makes sense.
We were saying that you did the least amount of damage and didn't even tank the most. You tanked less than me.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, all right. No, I was just clarifying because I think my mic might have cut out when you were explaining how you were really good at something.
Reckon I was throwing things in the wrong column.
Yeah. Okay. So you're claiming admin error.
Okay. Well, I healed the most, except Calvin healed 16 in 1 round for some strange reason, and I was like, yeah, sure, okay, that makes sense. Some AOE boing healing.
Yeah.
You healed 0, by the way, so I think that's like a real mark against you right now and team playing.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have statuses, and you ended up, now I may be inaccurate on this, but you did 7 and I did 6. And then Phil did 1 and Calvin did none.
Yeah, I mean, and jokes aside from it, it's really interesting to track that stuff. It's cool just to have a bit of a look, and we had a bit of a laugh as we went through, and obviously we're talking about it now. I really felt like everybody did pull through in that mission, like in that scenario. It
Definitely.
didn't feel like anybody was being carried or anyone was like being selfish. Like everyone was genuinely trying, which is cool. And the numbers work themselves out because you can draw a miss on a big hit, or you can, take a couple of big hits and go through that. But yeah, it's fascinating to see it. But I definitely think that we're all contributing pretty well equally.
Oh yeah. Like it's fun to see everyone so into it and trying to coordinate their turns and trying to coordinate abilities, and it's it's a level of seriousness. We all want to win, but no, it's been super enjoyable so far playing with this particular group.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to when we get a couple more cards and we can start kind of learning and combining the synergies. Just because getting the classes to work really well together. Be interesting when we start unlocking some other different classes, because I know that in Gloomhaven there were some really good combos and stuff like that worked between different classes. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Next week we will be tackling scenario 4. We won't be doing an outpost phase because this scenario is linked, so we just launch straight into it, and then we'll wait and see whether or not how many attempts it'll take to actually clear that one before hopefully we're doing our post phase. And by that stage, we may have even leveled up for the first time as well. So we've got a lot to kind of look forward to.
Yeah, I need to get a lot of XP in the next mission. I've only just kind of worked out that the only way for me to get XP is burning cards. So it's I've got to get through most of my deck. So yeah, all good luck for you guys.
Yeah, well, once I set up a system, everyone who's listening can send you some XP. And they can leave some DMs with some XP and I'll read them out for you.
Excellent.
So thank you all for joining us on another episode of A Master's Degree in Rolling Terribly. I've been your host, Detty.
And I'm still Gaz. And remember, when it comes to rolling terribly, it's all in the wrist.